Good morning, everyone. We will be beginning the webinar now. I hope you're all doing well and keeping safe. Thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of Gudera, I welcome you to this webinar on amendments of sections to the Income Tax Act. We're glad to be hosting this webinar for our NGOs, corporates, and other individual donors like you. I am Kajal. I am your host for this session. I'm a part of the CSR consulting team at Gudera. Now coming to why is Gudera conducting this webinar? We know that entities registered under sections 12A or 12AA of the Income Tax Act are allowed full tax exemptions on their income. And further, if these entities also have the ATG certifications, then individuals or organizations making donations to such entities are also eligible for tax deductions on the donations they make. And now these sections have been amended and they are expected to have major implications on NGOs, corporates, and other individual donors like you. Gudera has been dealing with queries regarding these changes from our corporates and NGO partners, and it seemed imperative to make a larger audience aware and clear about the terms and conditions of these changes. In this webinar, we will first try and understand why these changes are being implemented, what are their implications, and how to approach the new application process. And towards the end, we will do a live Q&A session, and we will also shed light on the next steps and available further assistance. Please make sure to put in any questions that you may have in the chat box below. To help us understand and deal with these changes, we have AK Dadich & Co as a knowledge partner. They are a chartered accounting agency operational out of Mumbai, Delhi, Pune, and Jaipur. And our key speakers are Mr. Aditya and Ms. Pradnya. Mr. Aditya has 6+ years of experience in taxation and audit. He has worked with Ernst & Young Mumbai, KPMG Oman, and NM Raji & Co. And he is a commerce and law graduate and has also completed his company secretary course. He holds a FAFP, DISA, and AML certifications. Ms. Pradnya brings 9+ years of experience across multiple facets of international taxation, business tax advisory, litigation, and compliance. She has worked with Ernst & Young, BK Khare & Co. and GMR Energy in the core tax team. She was also the finance head at Global Group and was in charge of finalization of accounts and audit. Pradnya holds a FAFP certification. Thank you, Aditya and Pradnya, for joining us here today. And the discussion will be moderated by Ms. Tejashree. She is a CSR consultant with 8+ years of experience and has been a strategic advisor on CSR compliance, strategy formulation, program design, and impact assessment to our corporate clients. She holds a master's degree in international development from the London School of Economics. Now to begin with, first, let's talk about the key changes that have been brought about in the Income Tax Act through the finance bill that was passed in February 2020. Firstly, all existing registrations and approvals granted to exempt entities under sections 1023C, 12A, 12AA, and ATG will be inoperative from 1st of October 2020. And all these exempt entities will have to submit fresh applications under the newly inserted section 12AB and amended sections ATG and 1023C. Most importantly, the concept of perpetual registrations will be scrapped, and the new registrations and certifications will come with a limited validity of 5 years. And as we all know, currently, the educational institutions could be registered under 1023C or 12AA. Henceforth, a trust with clear objects will have to make a choice and get themselves registered under either of the sections and not both. And lastly, the entities with the newly obtained ATG certification will have to prepare and furnish a statement of donations for the donors to be able to claim their tax deductions. So this was about the introduction. Moving on, over to you, Tejashree, for continuing with the discussion with our key speakers for today.
Thank you, Kajal, for that introduction and setting the tone for today's webinar. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I really want to start this discussion in details about the changes and its implication, etc., from a very basic understanding of the intent. So Pradnya, my question is to you to kick off this conversation. What is the reason behind these changes being made? And what do you think is the rationale behind those?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Kajal, for the introduction, and a very good morning to all the listeners. Now, the Finance Act 2020 has made the application process entirely electronic, wherein a unique registration number will be provided to new and existing charity institutions. This will create a kind of a repository of charitable institutions. We need to take a step back and understand why these changes are being brought into. So the thing is, in the past, many trusts have been formed with the intention of carrying out charitable and religious activities, but in the process, in the course, they have adhered to, private profiteering, or there have been business angles. So to curb such malpractices, the tax department is getting this 5-year registration process. So wherein, since so earlier there was perpetual registration,
Right.
but now there'll be a renewal. So in a way, the tax department gets a window that is after every 5 years, whatever the defunct entities are there, if there is any non-compliance of laws, so in that case, the registration will be revoked, the exemption will be revoked. So this, in a way, streamlines the registrations and the working of the NGOs. This concept has been taken from FCRA, wherein prior to 2015, there was perpetual registration, but after the amendment rules 2015, there also we have 5-year registration. So basically, the basic idea here is to have good governance over the non-profit sector and have some more transparency as to the registration process. That's the rationale, I would say.
Absolutely. So the newly created National Register also seems to aim at better regulation of the registration process, if we can say so that spending in the entire philanthropy and CSR space also becomes streamlined. I feel the same intent has also been reflected in one of the recent draft rules to the CSR law, where the ambit of the eligible partners to CSR is being limited, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the next question, which is about, who all entities are eligible under these changes. I would ask this question to Aditya to kind of let us know, are these amendments, omnipresent? Do they cover all types of non-profits?
So good morning, everyone. And thank you, Tejashree and Kajal, for the lovely introduction. So firstly, let us understand what is charitable purpose under the definition of tax laws. This includes purpose such as relief to the poor, education, yoga, medical relief, advancement of any other general public utility. These are broadly the areas which get covered under the definition of a charitable purpose. Now, typically, we have seen that the entity structures for carrying out such not-profit activities have usually been trust, societies, Section 8 companies, and other such institutions such as educational institutions, hospitals, which are promoting these activities. Here, I would like to say that advancement of general public utility shall not be considered as a charitable purpose if at all it is in the nature of trade, commerce, business, or rendering any services in that case, unless such activity is in the actual course of conducting such objects and the aggregate receipts do not cross 20% of the total receipts. Now, coming over to this amendment that has been recently introduced in the budget 2020, the entities which were registered under 1023C, either under section 12A or 12AA and section 80G, would now have to re-register themselves under the new regime. You were mentioning about the recent CSR draft rules 2020. I would like to throw some light on this as well. Now, as per the draft rule, CSR activities that are undertaken by the company, either by itself or through any company that is established as a Section 8 company, or any entity established under the Act of Parliament or a state legislature. Now, there has been a provision that has been given under the draft rules that the entity needs to register itself with the central government for undertaking any CSR work, and they need to file ECSR1 form. with the MCA. This is more like a repository. And the other important part here is going by the second proviso which they have given in the rule, it can also mean that trust and societies can get registered under ECSR 1 draft of the draft rules. But since it is in the draft stage, we need to wait for the final Gazette notification once it is released by the government.
Right, right. I think we'll move into more the nitty-gritties of how to apply and what are the modalities. I would like to pose a question to Pradnya if she could cover the registration process for us and the modalities which are associated.
So the new registration process is given under section 12AB, wherein the registration starts with the application, online application in the prescribed form. Now, in the erstwhile section 12AA, ATG and 1023C, the forms were specified as in 10A, 10G. They were, and there is one view that the same forms will continue, but as of now, there is no such amendment, whether there will be the same form or there are new forms to be issued.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the power to grant the registration was typically with the exemptions, income tax exemptions department, and the same appears to the mechanism would continue. Wherein once the application is made on receipt of the same, the tax official will call upon documents, information through a notice, which is just to satisfy himself of the genuineness of the activities which are carried out by the organization. So, and also the compliance matters, whether the NGO is compliant under whichever law it is registered. So this registration process in the past had personal hearings where you had to go to the department, submit the whatever documents are required, give explanations. So this was in the previous case. Now, in the current scenario, the thing is, recently the tax department has moved to faceless assessments, and a similar move can be expected in the registration process as well. So in the that is the NGO registrations, but we can just wait for the guideline, like whether it will be entirely online or department visits would be there. Now, once the all the notices are issued, the documents are complied with, on satisfaction of the tax officer, a written order will be passed stating that the institution will be, whether the institution is registered for a period of 5 years. Now, if it is not, if he is not so satisfied, even in that case, a written order will be passed wherein the registration will be rejected. In any case, the NGO will get ample opportunity of being heard. So that is basically it.
Right, right. Thank you, Pradnya, for that clarity. Before we move on to the next set of questions, I just want to appeal to all the people who have joined us today in this webinar to post your questions, if any, in the chat section that you might see on the right-hand side of your screen. We will be taking some of those questions towards the end of the session in the live Q&A form. So, Pranay, you spoke so elaborately about the process, but I'm sure to conduct this process, some documentation is going to be required from the NGOs. So could you shed some light on what all those documents are? And I mean, at what stage do they need to be submitted? There is, I'm sorry, there is actually a sub-question to that. Because you might have to submit some documents in order to prove genuineness of your activities, genuineness of your intent. So I would like to ask you a little bit about that process also, that how can an NGO prove its genuineness? Yeah.
Okay. So the thing is, submission of document, it happens at 2 stages. One is when you make an application. So like in the erstwhile, it was Form 10A, where you're making an application. Along with the application, certain basic documents were required. So like the copy of instrument, that is trust deed, copy of ROC registration, or note on the activities, the memorandum, the objects. If there is any change in the object, the same, the copy of the same would be required. So these are basically the very basic documents which have to be submitted along with the application to be filed. Now, once the application reaches the tax officials, they will issue notices as per whatever is their requirement. Now, this will differ from case to case. So we cannot have a straight jacket formula that, okay, these questions would be there. Depending on what the activities are, whatever his queries are, just to settle, like the question that you asked, a very valid question, that how you prove the genuineness. So typically what we have seen in the past is they'll ask questions on more on the maybe like say a detailed note on the activities or the objects of the trust, just so as to ensure that there is no profit angle or there is no business carried out by the organization. A note on maybe the area covered by the charitable trust. No objection certificates could also be required about the for the from the premise owner, or maybe if there is some funding, a huge investment is there, then in that case the tax official could also ask for the past 3 years funding, or if there is any corpus donation, details of the same could be asked for past 3 years, past 5 years, and also projections. So it basically depends on where the tax official has a doubt. Like he could have a doubt on the objects or the activities or the funds. Could be any of the things. So as I said, this is just an exhaustive list, and basically the idea is to link the objects and the activities which are carried out. They should be in sync, and secondly, there shouldn't be any profit angle. That's all. I mean, once that is complied, there should not be any other requirements.
Right. Um, let's move to now a very important question on the timelines, because we've been hearing so much about when to apply, by when to close the applications, and there are several timelines associated with at what level a particular NGO is. Is it already registered? Is it newly registered? Is it changing its objects? So there are multiple moving factors which will decide the timeline. The slide might look a little complicated, but I will invite Aditya to shed some more light on this and ease out this explanation for us. Aditya.
Sure. Thanks, Tejashree. Yes, I completely agree. It definitely looks a little complicated, but let me try to simplify it for everyone. So here there are certain categorization which has been prescribed, as you correctly mentioned, depending on the stage of the NGOs. So in case if you are already a registered trust, in that particular case, you need to reapply within 3 months. That is from 1st October to 31st of December 2020. The department shall issue the final registration within 3 months from the end of the month in which the application is filed. So this is for the ones who are already holding your registrations. Moving on to the second category, it talks about the trusts which are registered under the new provisions, that is either Section 12AB, 1023C or 80G for that matter. The application for refiling needs to be filed at least 6 months prior to the expiry of 5 years. So at the start of the webinar, we talked about this thing that perpetual registrations has been done away. So now registrations would be granted for 5 years. So in case if you are in that category where you have already received a 5 years registration and your registration is about to expire, in that case, you need to reapply 6 months prior to the expiry of your 5 years. The third category is talking about provisional registrations, which we are going to talk in the next slide maybe. So provisional registration is granted under 12AB to a particular trust, and the provisional registrations are valid for 3 years. So you need to reapply at least 6 months prior to the expiry of the provisional registration, that is 3 years, or within 6 months of commencement of the activities, whichever is earlier. The fourth category is in case if your registration has become inoperative. Say for example, now you are holding both the registrations under 1023C and 12AA. Under the new provisions, that would mean that any one of them would become inoperative. So in those cases, you need to reapply at least 6 months prior to the commencement of the assessment year from which registration has become inoperative. The fifth category is modifications in the object laws. And in case if your object laws are not in conformity with the conditions of registrations, in those cases, you need to go ahead and reapply within 30 days from the date of making such modifications. Now, for the categories 2 to 5, basically the final registration shall be granted from the department within 6 months from the end of the month in which the application has been filed. The sixth category is a residual category in nature. That means any new trust that it was not having any prior registrations nowhere, and the other category which can fall under the residual part is in case if some old application was filed in 12AA and they have not yet been provided any finality. In those cases, the timelines for re-registration would be at least 1 month prior to the commencement of the previous year relevant to the assessment year from which the registration is sought. Now, in the sixth category, the department shall grant you a provisional registration within 1 month from the end of the month in which the application has been filed, and this provisional registration shall be valid for 3 years. So this was a gist of the timelines which have been prescribed. Here, since there are multiple conditions that have been prescribed, it would be in the best interest of the NGOs to firstly find out where they fit and comply within the timelines that has been so prescribed.
Right. I really hope the audience found this explanation helpful because it involved, as I said, a lot of moving parts. Just on the last point, Aditya, where you spoke about the provisional registrations, I actually wanted to ask a follow-up question. Why are authorities granting these provisional registrations or say certifications? Are they beneficial in any way to the NGOs or to the donors?
Sure. So as we just discussed that for a new charitable entity, the application for provisional registration has to be made at least 1 month prior to the commencement of the previous year relevant to the assessment year. Now, just decoding this particular language. So for say instance, if we are talking about say financial year 2021, in that case, for the purpose of getting a provisional registration, the application should have been filed on or before 29th of Feb 2020. In case if the final order is awaited, then there can be a view that the trust would get provisional registration for financial year 2021. However, considering that this provision itself has come into effect from 1st of October, which was earlier 1st of June, they have extended. So since this has come effective from 1st of October, there requires some clarification as to clear out this issue. Now, let me talk about financial year 2021-22, that is the next year. In those cases, the application should be filed on or before 28th of Feb 2021 for getting provisional registration for the financial year 21-22. Now, provisional registration, as we just discussed, shall be granted within 1 month from the end of the month in which your application has been made. And the validity of this provisional registration is going to be for a period of 3 years. Now, once the provisional registration has been granted, the trust needs to apply at least 6 months prior to the expiry of the provisional registration, that is 3 years, or within 6 months of the commencement of the activity, whichever is earlier. Now here there are multiple interpretation which one can make on what tantamounts to commencement of activities. So for example, holding your trust or board meetings or receiving donations, opening bank account, what exactly would really come under the definition of commencement of activity is yet to be clarified. Effectively, this also means that if a trust after obtaining the provisional registration commences its activity, it needs to go ahead and apply for the final registrations as per the timelines that has been prescribed. So in a way, the relevance is a little, on the lower side, given the way the structure of this new section is. Therefore, careful evaluation again is required on the timelines, and application should be made within those prescribed timelines.
Right. So Aditya, to add to what you just said, can we say that the provisional registration or certification is really useful for the new agencies especially? Because from the CSR perspective, no agency without a track record will be eligible to seek CSR funds. So in that case, they on the basis of this provisional certification and registration, they can seek other non-CSR grants. And in case a particular entity does not have 12AA, which in the new regime means 12AB, automatically it becomes, I mean, it cannot seek CSR funds. But I mean, if you think from the new agencies perspective, those new entities which are trying to come into the social sector, without access to funding, how will they set the track record? So the provisional certification is really useful for these entities so that they can avail non-CSR grants to start with.
That's right.
Okay. I want to move to the next section and speak about the implications of these changes from a donor perspective. This question is to Pradnya, if she can summarize what are the implications of these amendments from a donor perspective. And donor, by donor I mean individual donors as well as corporate donors. And a sub question to that is, should a donor, a CSR donor, make any new grants available or any new RFPs should it float during this interim period? If not, until when the donor should wait? Pradnya.
Yeah, so that's a very valid question, Tejasri. So actually, for a donor to be able to avail deduction, the NGO has to get itself registered under the amended section 80G. So under this section, there are certain compliances. One is the certificate which has to be provided by the NGO to the donor. And secondly, there's a new compliance which is required, which is a statement has to be filed with the department giving the details of the donation which is received. So this is kind of a new compliance, and it is quite important because as per the reading of the section, it goes, I mean, there can be a view taken that if this statement is not filed, the donor will not be eligible for donation. Now, this puts a stringent compliance issue on the NGO. So whatever the statement is, it has to be filed, I mean, the prescribed in the prescribed format and in the time limits. Now, from the donor's perspective, there could be a case when the individual or corporate donor is making a donation and the trust is in the process of registration, interim period. Or there could also be a case where it is not has not received or has been denied registration under section 12AB. So in that case, there is an express immunity which is provided to the donors, which says that even in that case, that is if the registration is denied or for whatever reason, the donor will still be able to claim his deduction. So this is in the interest of the donors. However, as far as the NGOs are concerned, a little more clarity is required on the mechanism, because once you lose your registration under section 12AB, the erstwhile section 12A, what happens is you lose your exemption, and secondly, such trusts or NGOs they get covered under section 115 TD, wherein apart from tax which is levied on the income, there is also a tax on accredited income on at maximum marginal rate. Now, this is a key area of concern for the NGOs. So basically, compliance here is the key.
Understood. I just want to actually summarize this part from a donor's perspective, tying this to the CSR ecosystem that we are looking at. So for the CSR donors, there are really two different types of NGO partners from say 1st of October onward. One will have the track record already set. So they can go ahead and give funds to these NGOs, even if they don't have, the newly required 12AB and 80G recertification or, re-registration. But they can they can do this based on mutual understanding or the trust that they have already built with such partners. They can also request for an application copy from these NGOs. Another option is they can either postpone or bring forward the date of payment so that they don't terminate the partnership. Maybe that's the last resort, right? The other set of NGOs is those which are newly set up and they don't have a track record. I think I already briefly spoke about this earlier, that they will not be eligible for CSR, but however, they can apply for non-CSR grants, right? And generally, there are companies who give out CSR donations to the NGOs who don't hold ATG certifications. However, these are very few companies, but mostly it is a preferred practice in general that companies prefer the NGOs who have ATG certification. So it's a general appeal to all the NGO partners to apply on time and get the registration, re-registrations and recertification on time. Aditya, my next question is to you regarding statement of donation. This is a term we have been hearing a lot about. Is there a prescribed form for it? And if as an NGO I don't furnish it for my donors, are there any penalties involved?
Yeah, sure. The statement of donation, as you correctly said, is a newly introduced concept in the budget. So what it really means for the trust is that ATG registration, registered trusts and institutions are now required to give an annual statement of the donation that they have received during the year. So currently, the format and the details which are required to be furnished in this statement has not yet been notified, but you know, it may really contain the basic details such as your PAN number, the Aadhaar number of the donors, address proof, the amount that they have donated, etc. So the idea behind this concept is that the donors would be able to claim the deduction under Section 80G only when the statement has been filed correctly by the NGOs. So this is more like your TDS returns and Form 26AS, wherein the return needs to be first filed and then you can claim the tax. Similar position has been introduced in this budget for ATG donations as well. So regarding delay in filing this particular statements, then the NGOs can be subjected to a late filing fee of rupees 200 per day, that is under Section 234G. And in case if there is a penalty to furnish this statement, then under Section 271K, the penalty can be from the range of rupees 10,000 to 1 lakh. So this is the brief of the statement that has been so prescribed.
Sure. This question is to Pradnya. If she can cover some repercussions for the NGO partners, in case they fail to get the new registrations done, and repercussions also from the donors' perspective, especially on those long-term projects, you know, where the partnerships have been made and forged for years, and they are expected to go on for years. In these cases, some funds might be already disbursed or you're planning to disburse it. So what are the repercussions around these kind of projects and partners?
So it is presumed that CSR donors have made commitments in the past to NGOs which are registered under both 12AA and ATG. So it would be in their best interest that the NGO apply for re-registration under both sections, that is 12AB and ATG. Now there are two there are two cases. One is you get registered under ATG. One is registration under 12AB. 12AB allows exemption to the NGO, whereas ATG allows deduction to the donors. So here, if you're talking from the donors, CSR donors perspective, in case ATG registration is not obtained by the NGO, then obviously they won't be able to file a statement. And as Aditya rightly said, that if the statement is not filed, the department will not grant the deduction. So it is obviously it is recommended that not just recommended, it is actually mandatory that they take the NGOs take registration re-registration under ATG and submit the forms the statement with the department in the prescribed time limit. Now there is one more thing, that what if the NGO fails to apply under Section 12AB in the prescribed time limits, that is from 1st of October to 31st December.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this case, they might not only lose exemption, but they will also be taxed under 115 TD at maximum marginal rate. So it is possible they may have to go through a new, so they might be considered as a totally new entity, and they may have to go through the entire process, that is from provisional registration to the actual registration.
Mhm.
So yes, this is basically the implication on both the donors and the NGO.
Right. And one last point from maybe the CSR perspective is if they don't get the registration, then they will cease to be eligible as CSR partners, right?
Yes, I mean, they would prefer, because obviously if the donation which they are making, if they are not getting deduction under ATG, so I mean, any CSR partner would prefer that.
Right, right. I would like to actually break for say 30 seconds odd to see what questions have come in. So now that we have come to the end of the main Q&A session, I'll just take a stock from my team on what questions have come in, and if we can quickly choose some of them and pose them to the panelists. Just allow me a few seconds. Okay, I think the first question is very interesting. Pradnya, I'll ask you this question. We spoke from a donor's perspective. If in interim period, grants can be made available or RFP can be floated. But is an NGO eligible to apply for such grants? I mean, if they don't have the re-registration and recertification secured, they are in their interim period right now. So are they eligible to apply for grants? Pradnya, could you hear me?
Can you just repeat? I'm not able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. So one question which is coming up is, we earlier spoke from a donor's perspective. If in the interim period, could they float any new grants or create new RFPs? This question is a flip side to that from a NGO perspective. The question says that will an NGO be eligible for applying to new grants during the interim period?
See, the NGO can very well continue with the charitable or religious activities, and so accordingly it can accept donations, grants. The only thing that will change is the taxability. So the taxability will be decided by the registration. So if it is denied registration, in that case the income will be covered, will be taxable. But as far as the activities are concerned, they can continue with the charitable activities. But it is always advisable that you you apply and comply in the prescribed time limit.
Right. Another question which has come, I think this is very important regarding the cost. What is the cost of application for the reapplication, obviously, and the renewal part? Do the NGOs have to pay anything to the government?
Okay, so as far as the government cost, I mean, there is no filing fee as such. See, in the past also we used to file Form 10A or 10A, 10G. So there also we have never had any form filing fee, or there was no fee prescribed. And a similar position can be taken that, but of course there has not been any official announcement whether a new filing fee would be there. But as of now, we can assume that as in the past, there won't be any form filing fee.
Okay. We have one more question. Seems like it has come from an individual donor. And the question is about anonymous donations. What does it mean? Is PAN going to be made mandatory for anonymous donors to share? If yes, what's the implication of not collecting PAN? Aditya, could you take this question?
Sure. Anonymous donation per se, by their actual meaning, it really implies that the donee does not really maintain the record or the identity or any particulars of the donor when such donation has been made. It is anonymous in nature. It cannot be identified. So therefore, in a way, there is no such mandatory thing of furnishing PAN for an anonymous donation. To sum it up, like with an example, maybe when you go to a temple and donate in the hundis, it becomes like an anonymous donation. And if the donor wishes to take ATG deduction, then perhaps in the new provisions that has been so prescribed in the budget, he will have to give those basic details so that the statement of donation can be filed, and basis the statement of donation, the claim of donation can be made by the particular individual donor. So, this is, I think, the basic idea of anonymous donation. PAN mandatory is still not going to be mandatory, but in case if you wish to take a exemption or a deduction under ATG, then in that case, for sure, you need to give those details.
Okay, okay. Do you want to cover the taxability part of it as well?
For sure. Anonymous donation, regarding the taxability, let me break it up and explain. So anonymous donations are considered to be voluntary contributions. Now, in case if they are voluntary contribution and the criteria at the time of donating is this particular contribution should be forming a part of the corpus, in that case, there is no taxability at all. In case if the voluntary contributions are not a part of the corpus, in that particular case, the income should be included in the income derived from the property that is held under the trust. Now, coming to anonymous donation, a separate section has been carved out in the income tax law, that is section 115 BBC. So here, what this section typically says is that in case if the trust has received anonymous donation, in that case, they need to first find out two things. That is 5% of the total donation that they have received, or rupees 1 lakh, whichever is more, and then they need to pay tax at the rate of 30% on this component. Now, in case if this particular anonymous donation is received by a 1023C registered trust, university, education institution, hospital, or medical institution, as the case may be, the provision still remains the same, that tax at the rate of 30% would be applicable on higher of 5% of the total donations or rupees 1 lakh. The only exception to this particular provision has been given under 115 BBC, which states that if anonymous donation is received by a 12AA registered trust, which is conducting any charitable or religious purpose, in that particular case, section 115 BBC is not going to apply, and the taxability needs to be determined in the same manner of a voluntary contribution. So that means if the voluntary contribution is forming a part of the corpus, then it's not going to get taxed. And in case if it is not forming a part of the corpus, then you need to include it in the income that is derived from the property that is held under trust, and the relevant provisions would then come into effect. That could be either section 11 or section 1023C provisos, as the case may be.
Okay. Aditya, since we have got a lot of questions, we'll take some of them additionally. So you spoke about anonymous donation, but can you explain how is it considered as corpus as well?
So for the sake of considering it as a corpus, there has to be a specific direction from the donor that please include these as part of the corpus or the capital. So unless that specific direction is not there, you cannot really include it. So that specific direction is the key, and that's what has been prescribed.
Okay. Another question, I think we covered, sorry, we covered the application process and the documentations required, but one of the viewers has asked, will it be totally online submission? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So Aditya, the question is, will the application process be totally online? And the submissions of the documents, should it be in hard copies? Yeah. So hard copies of the documents are required or not, or is it online?
So Tejasvi, to answer that question, the application form has to be filed online, and certain documents need to be submitted as attachments to your application form. Now, post that, the department can issue, can call for some more documents to test the genuineness of your activities. Now, those things in the erstwhile laws were, proceedings, the hearing proceedings used to happen one-on-one. So there is still, we can presume that it would continue the same unless there is something which has been officially notified that they want to shift it completely online. But for sure, it's actually a mix of both the, both the routes, you can say. The application has to go online, and then the department can call you for rounds of hearing to, understand what you are doing, what is the objectives, and call for any other such documentations before giving you the writing order of the approval. So that's how it's going to be probably in the new set of rules that has been come into effect.
Sure. Another question is, if we need to file our 1920 returns, the last financial year returns, also before applying for the renewal of 12 AB and ATG, if we are applying on 1st October itself.
Right. So I think the question is regarding the taxability, whether they would continue to hold the tax status or not. So since, if I understand correctly, there could be one possibility, and which we discussed earlier, that in case if you are complying within the timelines that has been prescribed, you may still get the approval, at a later stage, but you can very well take that stand that we were already having an exemption, and within the timelines we have reapplied. So it gives a little comfort to my mind that that should be the view which can be taken. But again, there needs to be the entire mechanism needs to be clarified, and we are still awaiting how this entire mechanics, the groundwork would be ready in order to address all these nitty-gritties. There are a lot of gray areas, typically whenever a new section comes into effect. So definitely this can be one of the position. I think that's maybe the view which anyone can take, since you are a registered trust. So you need to comply within times, and then maybe you are you're through with it. So the compliance becomes the key actually.
Right. So Aditya, as you know, we are not too far from 1st of October timeline. We are just like 2.5 weeks apart.
Right.
And still we don't know the application form. Where is it? When is it going to come? So do we know when is it getting notified?
Well, not really. So as of now, there has been no such announcement where when the form shall be notified. In case if they continue with the old form, that is form 10A or 10G as the case may be, they might make some suitable changes in the particular form, but still there needs to be some clarity which form needs to come into effect, whether it's a new overhauled form altogether or is it the erstwhile form. But only time will tell, because I think because of the ongoing COVID pandemic, we saw a shift from the erstwhile date on which this particular section was to come into effect. So considering the roadblocks due to the pandemic, maybe there is a little bit of more time that is being taken, but it should be out pretty much soon. And in case if not, then they would clarify whether the old form is going to remain into force or not. So that needs to be actually clarified, and we are not sure when that would be announced.
Okay. And a subsequent question to the application form, one more an audience has asked, will an NGO have to apply for ATG separately or separately from the 12 AB section application? Is it part of the same application, or these are two separate applications?
So these were always two separate applications. Even in the erstwhile law, those were separate application, and even going forward also, there would be two separate forms for this case. There was never a single form for both actually.
Right. I think looking at the time, we'll take one last question because we have some way forward for our audience covered in the next section. So the last question is, you spoke about the penalty, right? If the statement of donation is delayed. So what does that delay mean, and what is that date?
So that date has not yet been prescribed. So typically any TDS return, some dates are prescribed that, you need to file it, say, within so and so days post the end of the quarter. We are not sure whether this is going to be a quarterly statement or is it going to be like an annual statement. That is not yet been clarified. So we need to really wait on this part, I feel, for any more official announcement.
Okay.
The format has also not been out, so it's in the interest that we really wait for the official form to be released, that how this return is going to look.
Sure. So firstly, I want to apologize to the audience because there were so many questions and we couldn't take all of them right now. But please rest assured, we will make a note of all the questions and we will revert with written answers to you. Thank you, Pradnya and Aditya, for such an insightful session. I want to hold you back, but hand over the session now back to Kajal, because she will be discussing the way forward for the audience, a step-by-step process, and also some gray areas for which we still don't have any, further clearance as yet. Over to you, Kajal.
Thank you, Tejasri, Aditya, and Pradnya for a super insightful discussion. Now, to quickly summarize and highlight the areas where we still require the clarification from the authorities. First would be of course, the application form, as Aditya mentioned, and the associated costs and fees. Second, the format and the timelines for the statement of donation. And most importantly, what happens in case an NGO misses to apply before 31st of December? And also, what options will an NGO have whose registrations have been rejected or cancelled? Would there be an option of making a second appeal? And what would be the timelines and requirements for the same? And as Aditya mentioned, that we are also hoping to get these clarifications in a couple of weeks, as the registrations will need to begin from the 1st of October. And to summarize the immediate next steps for our audience, as an NGO, we recommend you to first seek professional assistance to help you out with the process, keep all the supporting documents and the forms prepared. And post 1st October, as Aditya and Pradnya mentioned, that timely compliance is the key. So it would really be imperative to submit the online application at the earliest possible date. And as a corporate, we recommend you to identify the preparedness of your NGO partners and help them obtain the required professional assistance so that they can keep their documents and forms prepared. And more importantly, we also recommend you to include these changes in your due diligence standards for any new nonprofits onboarded. And also, Goodera has identified partners for further assistance, and advice for NGOs. For this webinar, our knowledge partners were AK Dadich and Co, and they are happy to assist you in every way possible. Additionally, we have other partners situated across India with pre-agreed preferential rates. For more information about them and to connect with them, you can reach out to us on the email ID mentioned in the slide. Lastly, we have another special announcement to make for our NGOs. Goodera has launched the Karma community. This is to connect the NGOs with one another and empower them to share their knowledge and expertise for the sector. This is one of the largest communities for nonprofits, and the intention is to boost social impact and their visibility among the corporates. To be a part of this or acquire any more information, you can join our Facebook group named Karma Community. We are now at the end of the session. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We really hope you found the session useful. Please reach out to us for any further assistance and advice. Have a good day and take care.